And so when I saw the Jeff Beck group was coming to the Boston Tea Party in October, I bought a ticket. And the dogs don't like the rain, and it's starting to rain. Uh, so I'm in there, and this is only 6 months later, and I see Richard, the road manager, walking by. I said, Richard. He said, hey, mate, how you doing? I said, I'm great. He said, come backstage and meet the lads. So I said, okay. He says, this is Jeff. I said, Jeff Beck. And this is Rod Stewart and Mick Waller, and here's Ronnie Wood, who was playing bass. And Ronnie was a guitar player, and Jeff needed a bass player, so he said, here, put this on. And, he played on the first album. Well, they did their show, and it was awesome. I mean, I was totally floored. But before, that was all during setup. And Don Law, who was running the tea party, he brought in dinner for the band. Well, the opening act was Jethro Tull. So we're all upstairs in the upper balcony of this old church, and people are sitting around eating all this Chinese food. And so I met Ian Anderson and Martin Barr and Clive Bunker and all of Jethro Tull. Well, I became friends with the guitarist, and we exchanged addresses and became pen pals and like that. So they put on an incredible show, and I asked Richard if he'd put me on the guest list for the next night, and he did. And I brought my high school girlfriend. We took a lot of pictures and had a great time. So a little bit of time went on. It became February, and the first Led Zeppelin tour was at the Tea Party, as part of, that was one of their dates, because in the fall, the first Zeppelin album came out, and, we were just, wow, dazed and confused, and that White Summer and everything. Yeah. So same thing. Richard, the same road manager, was now managing Zeppelin. Same thing. Oh, come back and say hello to Jimmy and Robert and, all that. So we went through all that. And I reminded Jimmy that I had met him just 6 months before in the Yardbirds. They were very nice, and it was really cool. And I had pictures of Robert on the stage with my old Nikon matte camera and whatever it was. It was just, it was mind-blowing. So there I was, still in the Oxbow incidents, and just ready to do our last job, and just before the Rock Symphony. And I had met two of the greatest guitar heroes of all time. But actually, it was right around Halloween, the same fall of '68, and Cream was on the Goodbye Cream tour. So I couldn't get tickets to the Garden to see their show, but for some reason it got canceled. So I was and rescheduled in Providence, Rhode Island, 3 or 4 days later. Well, I was walking around Beacon Street, and there was a nice hippie chick walking my way, and she looked like the perfect flower power hippie girl, right? But she was wearing a jacket, a fringe jacket with a big moon or something on the back. And I recognized it as Eric Clapton's jacket, because it was in I Magazine or Rolling Stone or something. I read the interview and I saw him with the jacket. So I said, hey, I'm Howie McDonald. I'm a guitar player. And she said, oh, I'm Anna or whatever. And she said, I balled Clapton last night, and I was so good, he gave me his jacket. I said, really? I said, wow, that's fascinating. I said, well, I got a doobie. Do you want to smoke it? She said, sure. So we smoked it. It's about 9 o'clock, and, the traffic is starting to move through down Beacon Street. And we were on a corner, and there was just like a little patch of grass there. And all of a sudden she said, shh. my little baby girl here likes me to hold
Oh,
her during
oh,
the thunder.
you know what? That my dog does too. We have a Labradoodle,
Uh-huh.
and he freaks out with the thunder bad.
Yeah.
He wants to get out. I mean, he just wants to get somewhere safe, you
Yeah.
know. So
Right.
yeah,
And
he's always.
you can feel them kind of shaking next to your heart, you know.
That's right. That's
Uh,
why, you know, I heard that it's not so much the sound, but their coat. It kind of vibrates.
well, there's electromagnetic static
There you go.
electricity in the air, so they're highly
Right.
sensitized. Uh,
Yep.
anyway, the girl, to make a long story short, there, she said, you know, I want you to do me. I said, right here. And uh, she took Clapton's jacket off and put it on that little part of grass and stripped off, and I stripped off, and we did it. And then it was time to go. I said, nice meeting you. Uh, um, so anyway, the Cream were doing their last show uh, at the Garden. It was canceled, and so I went and saw them at the Rhode Island Auditorium, which was the old Rhode Island Reds professional hockey team's arena. So not built for sound at all. Well, during Ginger Baker's 12-minute drum solo of Toad, I went around the back of the stage, and there was Eric Clapton sitting behind his Marshall stack that said Cream on it, smoking a Camel, and I introduced myself and started talking to him. And I asked him about Blind Faith, because all the rumors were he was going to start a band with Stevie Winwood and Rick Gretsch and whatnot. And but in those days, you would never divulge what's coming next. It was like the kiss of death for an artist. He said, Stevie Winwood? I don't even know Stevie Winwood. And then, like 6 months later, the album comes out, right?
Yeah.
So within an 8-month period, I had met my three greatest guitar heroes, Beck, Clapton, and Page. And I had met Hendrix in the Village in '65 when I was 15 on one of my unsupervised weekends. So then the festival of all festivals, the 1969, normally it's the Newport Jazz Festival, but the promoter said it's going to be the Newport Rock and Pop and Jazz Festival. And they had the cream of all the British bands, you know, Alvin Lee and Jeff Beck and Jimmy Zeppelin, and, you know, just everybody. But they had Blood, Sweat, and Tears and Roland Kirk, and, you know, just they really mixed it up. So I was there all 3 days, and Jimmy Page came in on a Friday. They were going to close the festival on Sunday, but Jimmy wanted to get the feel of it because he knew it was a big festival. So I'm walking around backstage, and first I ran into Jeff, and I said, hey, is Rod here? And he said, yeah, he's in the dressing room over here. Go say hi to him. So I went in and said hi to him and Ronnie Wood, and they were teasing their hair. They had a lot of hairspray. You know, they're giggling like a couple of girls. And then the door opens, and in walks David Clayton Thomas. And, you know, he had no hair, and he was kind of a big guy. And he looked totally out of place, like a mattress salesman coming in or something. And they turned their hairspray on him and like sprayed him out of the room. So he retreated. So I said, you know what, guys, I'm going to get some air. I'll see you have a great set. So I'm out walking around, and lo and behold, I bumped into Jimmy Page, and he's there holding his Les Paul, and he put it down. He said, hey, man, you got any downs? I said, no, I don't have any downs, Jimmy. I got a joint if you want to smoke it, some Mishmacon. He said, yeah, let's do it. So we stood there and we're smoking it. And after about 8 minutes, he kind of, if you've ever been on an acid trip and you're way out there and you do a doobie, it kind of just, okay, my feet are on the ground now. And then up walks Jeff Beck with his gold top around his neck. He says, "Oh, hey, Jimmy." And Jimmy says, "Hey, Jeff." And so Jimmy felt obliged to take out his red Sunburst Les Paul at 59. So Jeff says, "Jimmy, you seen this lick?" And he goes, you know, and Jimmy says, "Yeah, but what about this?" And Jimmy would fire back a lick, and then Jeff would do some pull-offs like on Jeff's Boogie or something, and then go all the way up the neck. And Jimmy would play something like Out of Dazed and Confused. And Jeff came back and did something, and Jimmy was like, he took off his Les Paul. He handed it to me. He said, "You play." And he just sat down. So Jeff just continued, and he said, "How about this one?" And I played like the best lick I knew. And I was like, "No, this can't even be happening." Yeah. And so I said, "I think that's probably enough. Let's get this guitar back in the game." You know, when you first learn stuff off a record, because that's all we had, you know, it'd be Attack the Record Player, and you'd put the needle back like 300 times. What was that lick? How did he do it? You know, cassette tapes were a little bit more helpful in that respect. But Jethro Tull was also at the festival. Johnny Winter and BB King at that Newport festival. So BB did a great set. Johnny did an incredible set. And then they were both going to jam together. Well, I went backstage, and I went to Johnny's dressing room and told him I was from Orange, and about his drummer going to school with my cousin and all this. And he said, "Oh, guitar player." And he was playing a Fender Mustang. He said, "Here, try mine." And literally the strings were this far off the fret. Really? So you had to have like steel driving hands just to bend a note. I mean, it was unbelievably tough. It was also really set up for slide playing too, but he had enough power in his fingers and hands where he could handle that heavy gauge of string. Yeah. So I said, "All right, I'm going to go get out front and check your set out." He said, "Cool." Then BB played, and they announced Johnny Winter is going to jam with BB King in 20 minutes. And so Jimmy Page, Robert Plant, Alvin Lee, and a couple of other dudes, we all went down and got in a row of chairs and sat together. And on my left was Jimmy, and then Robert and Alvin. And they said, "Who do you think's going to come out on top?" And Robert said, "BB will kill him." And Jimmy said, "I don't know. Let's wait and see." And boy, they came out, and just to watch BB King playing with Johnny Winter, sitting with Jimmy Page, Alvin Lee, and Robert Plant. Yeah. And I'm 19.
Right.
So I always had heard that if you want to do something or become something, you hang around with the people who you want to be like, and you do what they do. And so I got the clothes and had the attitude and was hanging out. So in my mind, there was no doubt that I was going to be a great, famous guitar player. And even when I wasn't, I presented myself that I would, and eventually I was. Then somewhere along the line, I'm down in Provincetown, and Pale Rider had a volume 2 because Bobby Wiegand went off somewhere. We reformed the band, played around, and eventually that broke up. And I was just sitting around with my girlfriend, and I got a phone call from a guy named Steve Jablecki, who had been in a group called the Mojo Hands. Now, when I was in the Oxbow Incidents, we always saw the Mojo Hands playing at Merrill's Lounge. Now, this was a bar. We'd only played colleges, and the frat parties, they would have a keg, and everyone's drunk and puking and running around in their underwear and crazy stuff like that. But but we never played any bars because we weren't old enough. But Jablecki looked old enough, so his group, I think Denny Casino, some other guys. So I knew who he was. He called me up and he said, I'm in a band now. It's called the Wadsworth Mansion.
There you go. Yes, yes.
Right. And we've got a hit record called Sweet Mary, I'm Coming Home.
Mhm.
And the producer said we need a real heavy guitar player songwriter. And your name came up. So I said, well, drive down here and we'll spend an afternoon together and we'll see if we vibe together. So he showed up on the designated date and he came in and I got out my acoustic and we started playing and we wrote a song called something like, we gotta have a good time floating in. Ain't no much, but it ain't a sin. Oh, can you feel it? And I said, okay, we got a song out of this. I'll join. So he said, okay, great. We're about to start recording the next album. And we're recording at the Ed Sullivan Studios in New York. And we'll pick you up. So at that time, his brother Mike was playing the drums. Now and a guy named John Poole was playing the bass. One of my first church jobs, I met a girl named Karen Poole, really cute. And she was John Poole's younger sister. Well, so she introduced me to John, said that he plays music. And actually, John and Mike and a guy named Rick Silva and I had a jam session at Rick Silva's house, probably in '64, sometime around there. But at any rate, I get in the mansion and I know the other two guys. I know Mike Jablecki and John Poole. So, okay, let's rehearse. We rehearsed a little bit and we drove up to New York City. We're at the Ed Sullivan studio and I met the producers, Jimmy Calvert and Norman Marzano. Now, Norman was in a group called the Trade Winds, and they had a song called New York's a Lonely Town.
Yeah.
And another guy from Rhode Island named Vinnie Poncia was the star of that. Well, Vinnie actually produced the Ringo album years later, and he let Jimmy Calvert play on one of the Ringo's rhythm guitar on one of the Ringo songs. I would have liked to have played on that album, but it wasn't time. So anyway, we played the 4 songs. They sounded great. And in the middle of the session, a beautiful buxom blonde came in and is hanging out in the control room. So she latched on to Steve. And when we were done, we went back to the hotel. And there was, those were the days where that have 2 maybe double beds in one room, 1 double bed in the other room, and all of the roadies and everybody else slept on the couches and the floor and whatnot. So John and Steve, being the most senior guys, they were sharing the room. So I went to bed and the girl was in there with Steve and she wore him out. And so then she jumped on John and she wore him out. And John said, next room down the hall. And she came in and she wore me out. And then I don't know what happened to her after that. Well, I had a deal with my girlfriend down on the Cape. And she said, look, I know you're a musician and I know you get groupies and all this stuff. She said, so all I ask is don't do anybody in town here. Out of town, I don't care. Nobody in town. I said, okay, fine. So this was Jane Mead, and she had a friend named Albert Corliss, who was the bouncer at the Atlantic House, the A House, a big after hours nighttime spot there on the Cape, not too far from our place. Well, Albert met this girl who happened to be the beautiful buxom blonde who came and just happened to be in P-Town. So I'm sure she went home with Albert. And the next day, I'm playing my guitar, was what I do all day long. I play about 11 hours a day in those days. And we hear the door knock, and Jane and I went to the door and opened the door, and there's Albert and there's the girl. And Albert says, Jane, this is Anna, or whatever her name was, and Howie, this is Anna. And the first thing out of her mouth was, oh, I know you. You umped me in New York City. And I just started laughing. I said, Jane, I was out of town. I didn't know she was going to come to town. But Jane was cool about it.
It was out of town.
No, but it blew my mind. I mean, what are the odds, right?
Right.
So we started touring around and playing coliseums and stuff like that. Well, shortly after,
was that were you with them when you toured with Alice Cooper?
Alice Cooper and Edgar Winter,
Yeah.
they did a 35 state tour opening up for them. And after that tour, they were playing the Providence Civic Center, and Steve Jablecki and I went over to see Alice and Neil, his drummer. They were sharing a room. And there was an empty case of Budweiser all stacked up, and they each had pellet guns and were sitting in their beds shooting over the stacks of stuff. When you're on the road, people get a little stir crazy. But we were playing coliseums, and it was the first time I had played a coliseum was with that band. And it's funny because there's a bunch of lights. It's pretty dark out there, and it's like an ocean of people. Yeah. And the waves, it's like being on a boat at night, and you can sort of see white caps or something. So you kind of see people, and you hear this sound echoing all around. Well, before we did the recording at the Ed Sullivan studio, we rehearsed at Studio Instrument Rentals in New York City. There's one in New York and LA, and that's where all of the big bands would rehearse. They have studio stages of all size. Well, we're on the band, and I'm hearing right up the stairs, because we're on the back stairway just chilling, and I hear this incredible music coming from the next floor. I said, that's the group I want to be in. And so I walked up the stairs and talked to one of the roadies. I said, who is that? And they said, oh, that's Edgar Winter with Jerry LaCroix rehearsing for what became the Roadwork album. And that 12-minute version of Tobacco Road and Save the Planet and all this stuff. It was great. So where were we? We were off on tour, and shortly after I had been in the band, maybe 3 months, Mike Jablecki decided he wanted to go back to college and become a businessman, and he had had enough of this fooling around music stuff. So I got my friend Charlie Flannery, who was in the group Pale Rider, and I said, I got a guy. So we set up an audition, 2:00 at the Wadsworth Mansion in the practice room. And this was a 3 or 4 level mansion. And so many of the rooms were rented out to other people, some groupies, some other people. And they all packed in and were crowded around the room when Charlie auditioned. And course, Charlie got the job. This is Charlie right here next to me.
That's
And then
you.
here's Steve Jablecki over here. And I think this is Mike Messier, our roadie, and Mike Jablecki, and then John Poole, the bass player.
Oh,
If,
okay.
if I'm
Hold
seeing
that up, hold that up to the screen a little closer. There we go. And then to your right.
okay. Oh, sorry.
There we go. There we go. So we can get a better look of. There we go. All right. Hold it right there just for a few seconds. Yeah, that's a nice pick. Nice picture.
Yeah, that was up in Vermont we were playing. And my sister had a place nearby, so we detoured and went over there to see her. And we took a bunch of pictures, like holding chickens and throwing them up in the air, and things like that. It was pretty cool.
Well,
So Charlie's in the band, and we're off, and we were doing a Southern tour.
uh-huh.
Well, actually, before the Southern tour, we were doing a New England, New Jersey, Delaware, that section of the upper East Coast. And we were staying at the Red Bull Inn. I remember because they had a pack of cards with Red Bull Inn on it. Charlie went down to the car to get a pack of cigarettes. And there was a hot looking girl there, and she asked him for a light, and they got to talking, and he said, well, why don't you come up to my room in a little bit? And she said, okay. Well, about 20 minutes later, Charlie's there all anxious and everything, and he doesn't hear anything. So, and no knock on the door. So he got out and walked next door and to John's room, hey, John, have you seen? And there's the girl. Well, Charlie said, I thought you loved me. But anyway, she had a good time with John and went in with Charlie. But she didn't want any more, and the next thing I hear is Charlie burst into my room. He said, that crazy chick pulled a knife on me. I said, well, you probably deserved it, Charlie.
Yeah, it sounds like it. I think so.
Right. So anyway, on one of our tours down south, we landed in New Orleans, and we had a crossover before we got a little plane to Alexandria or something. Well, John Poole, the bass player, had a prescription for Reds or Tuinal, so some kind of barbiturate. And he talked Charlie into wheeling him around the airport in a wheelchair for like 3 Reds. So Charlie took him, and John was pretending he was handicapped, and Charlie was rolling them all around. And so it finally came time to go through the plane boarding for the next hop, and Steve Jablecki put his guitar up on the conveyor belt, and sometimes he wouldn't say the brightest things. The attendant there said, what's in this case? And Steve said, a bomb.